former judge and former U.S. attorney. Carol Lam is with us, and you've been listening in. Carol, your take on all that has been disclosed.
Yeah, this is very concerning, Anna, because, by the time we get to federal court, you like to think that there's some maturity going on. What's going on now really sounds like a preschool or kindergarten. You've got a government team that has not worked together, not worked in that district, not appeared before that judge, not worked with the FBI agents who are investigating the case. And that's a big concern. That's like having a surgical team that has never worked together before. The fact that Pat Fitzgerald, who is Jim Comey's defense attorney, has not only not seen the evidence in the case, but can't even figure out from the indictment what the charges are, is very concerning. This is, I'm not given to a hyperbole, but this is ridiculous. The whole purpose of an indictment is to give notice to the defendant about what the charge against him or her is. And the fact that somebody as experienced as Pat and even as experienced as Jim cannot figure out what the charges are, Judge Nachmanoff must be saying, we have moved into a whole new realm here of immaturity and lack of experience, and he's going to have to try to marshal this through a system that is used to people who are professional and know what they're doing. That is just not the case here. It's very discouraging.
Carol, we've talked a little bit about the possibility of the judge dismissing this case even before it gets to a trial. At what point would that typically happen, if at all?
It would happen after the motions are filed. So the defense team here for Jim Comey has a deadline in October to file motions. This is a rocket docket. Things do move quickly, at least at the beginning stages. And one of the motions may be a dismissal for vindictive prosecution or retaliation. And the judge would rule on that probably, within a few weeks. The question here is whether Judge Nachmanoff is going to try to stay within the bounds of what typically and normally happens in these cases, or whether he's going to say, this has just taken such a bizarre turn that there's no reasonable possibility that a jury is going to convict Jim Comey, which is candidly what I think. But the question, these motions are rarely granted because, let's say Lindsay Halligan comes in with an affidavit that says, no, regardless of what President Trump said, I was going to indict this case anyway, which is frankly hard for her to do since she was only appointed pretty much the day before. There could be enough contrary evidence that the judge says, we're going to let this go to a jury. But that's going to be a tough call for Judge Nachmanoff. I'm not sure what the result would be if when that motion is filed.
Of course, the person who was in the role of U.S. attorney in this Eastern District of Virginia before Lindsay Halligan was ousted by the president, again, because, according to our reporting, he didn't think this case was strong enough to seek an indictment, and neither did prosecutors who were working with him on this case. The president has singled out Eric Siebert as well in many of his online posts as he's talked about this Comey case. Carol, at some point, could Eric Siebert, could other people inside the U.S. Attorney's office be called as witnesses?
Well, I think we have to consider the fact that a lot of these communications internal to the Justice Department were done under attorney-client privilege, and there would have to be a very, very strong showing that privilege should be invaded for purposes of the defense motions. It's possible that it could be, but that, again, is going to be a call for Judge Nachmanoff to make. There are a lot of little decisions that have to be made along the way here, and the judge is going to have to make those decisions. But the initial reaction will be, no, those are internal deliberations, and they are covered by the attorney-client privilege and the attorney work product, and they will not be permitted to be disclosed.